All right, we're back. It is COMP1004, and it's the winter 2017 semester, and it's week 5, part 2 of our broadcast. We're just continuing the what we were doing earlier, which is this stuff. We've created a little options page, and this is a modal form. I want to return the values of whatever I've selected or not selected here. When I click the accept button, when I click cancel, I just want to close the form off, right? So let's do that one first. So what do I do if I want to click cancel? Double click. Remember, the code is going to go here inside of my options form cancel button click events, this one here. I'm just going to say this.close, right? Because that's all I want to do. And we're going to test one function at a time to make sure that it all works. So this.close, cancel. One day. And if I was to run this thing as an example and I run it, and again, we're trying to make this work, go to options and I click cancel, it closes and we're back here. So that's what it should do, right? Notice that the form doesn't continue. If I do this again, it generates a brand new form. It does not remember anything from the form, which is actually a negative, right? So here's what I want to do. Whatever option I choose, scientific or standard, square root and exponent or not, when I come back here to this form, I want to remember, right? That's something I want to do. How do I do that? And then when I go back, when I click accept, right now it doesn't do anything, but when I click accept, I want to take these functions or whatever I've chosen and go back to the other form. That's what I want to do. So we have some things to think about, right? How do I do that functionality? First of all, how do I return information back from my form, right? If it's accept or cancel. Can I even test for that like I asked you to? Did I do it right? So first of all, we were sent there by the calculator form. Right, so I did this options form dot show dialog, and I can create something called a dialog result, like I've done before. Dialog result, we'll call it result. We'll do it all in one line. Is equal to options form show dialog. Now the show dialog method automatically returns a dialog result, and all we're doing here is we're kind of creating an object of type result, dialog result, and storing it here. Right, that's what we're doing, all in one line. You could also do it differently. If you really wanted to, you could create something like this inside your form. You can say dialog results is equal to results, right? A reference. This is the create a dialog results container. That's what this is really what it is. So variable or whatever, right? And then all you have to do is just set the results from the showed the dialog that we've just created into the result. If you like doing that more, if it makes more sense for you, it's totally fine and even maybe preferred. All right, so this is nice. And what I want to do is it depends on what the result is, if the result is whatever it is. But what if I want to show results? Remember, maybe I did this with you already. I want to not just show a message box, but I want to do some debugging information. And I want to show stuff on the debugger, on the output window. Right? Let me show you what I'm talking about here. When I run an application, I have something called an output window that also runs down here. There's my output window, right? My output window can also be used for testing and for some kind of debugging information, right? That's what this is. I want to be able to, quote unquote, write line to it. I want to do a debug.writeLine. That's what I want to do. However, it won't work out of the box like that, right? I need to set that off. So here's what I want to do. I want to see something like this. I want to debug.writeLine. That's what it is. And I want to debug.writeLine the result, whatever it is, .toString. Right? So I want to change the result to string and I want to write it out. But the problem is, right now the compiler doesn't know what debug is. And if I hover over that, it says, doesn't understand what that is. But if I kind of hover over it and press Control dot, right, it gives me some options, right? Visual Studio is really great at this. So how do I do that? You can double click onto it, and if you notice this little light bulb that comes up, it says, hey, there's a couple things you can try. Like, for example, using system diagnostics. If you put that using system in, this using statement, it'll actually include the diagnostics namespace, which enables debugging, right? That's what I want to do. So you can click that here. Or if I double click on this and press Control and then period, it'll bring up the same information, Control dot. And a lot of times it'll give me autocomplete opportunities right, by pressing Control dot. All right, so I want to choose this one and click using System Diagnostics, double click. What this does is at the top of the form, it actually includes another using statement. Remember we talked about what using statements are. They include additional libraries into your code, right? So I'm including the diagnostics library, so I can do a debug.writeLine. What writeLine does is it'll write to the output window whatever I want, whatever string result I want, which is good debugging information. If you're used to using JavaScript, this is equivalent to doing like console.log or console.info, console.error, console.whatever, right? The console command, right? Let me try this out and see what happens. Yeah. And when I get there, when I go Tools, Options, right? Watch the output window back here, right? And if I click Accept or Cancel, if I click Cancel, right? I get Cancel, right? See how it come up right here in the output window? Cancel came up, right? I actually outputted Cancel. Now, in order for you to see this, you have to see the output window, and you have to do that only when you're debugging, when you're actually running with debugging. Guys, no talking. I can't hear a darn word. Huh? Which one? I could do that. Please don't let me compete with you guys today, because you know what? At the end of the day, I'll be the winner. I'll guarantee you, right? So we don't want that to happen, because I'll just ask you guys to go for today, and then you'll lose that. I wouldn't want that. I love all my students. I love all my students, even the people who are loud, right, at times. But for now, please be respectful for everybody else and keep it down. If you need to do something, whisper. If you really need to have a conversation, leave the room and come back. That's just norms, right? And if we were in a real business meeting, I would ask you to do the same thing. Okay, so here we are. We've got this thing. It does return what dialog result we want. So this is good. So if I press the cancel button doesn't just result in the event being canceled, but also get a result back that I can test for. I can test whether my result is cancel or accept. Those are really important, because then I can switch that result. Yes?
This is returning as a string.
No, actually, it's returning as a result. I'm just turning it into a string.
Oh, but there's like a predefined result variable called accept.
Yes, because the dialog result for my custom dialog box, there's only two normal responses: accept or cancel. And you can change those to look like whatever they want. You can make them yes, no. You can make it okay, cancel, or whatever you want. If you wanted to make other kinds of results, you could, but you'd have to make your own class, a subclass of what you want to do. Okay. All right, so that's we know that happens now. We can test for this, and so now let's make the accept button. All right, so here's my accept button, and then I want to do also this dot close at the end, right? I want to still do this, right? Either way, we're going to close the box, right? But I want to be able to transfer information back. That's the trick. How do we do that? So I'm going to start the page, and now we can see after I've done this, when I go to my options, tools, options, right? And if I click accept, now I should see, oh wait, what happened here? How come it said cancel? Right? I did accept, right? I hit accept, but I got a cancel result, right? Look, in the cancel menu, let me try this again so you can see it. Either way, whether I press OK or cancel, I got, the result that's being returned, right, is cancel. How do I control that? Look, here's accept, and I got a cancel down here, right? Yes. Well, I copy pasted, but remember that if I go back to my my calculator form, I'm not using the same function. I go, they're still closing, but what else could I do? Is there another function I could use, right? And if, for example, is there something that I can return, right? And I want you guys to look it up for a second. So here's my designer, right? So I can show you this is this box. And if I go to my options form, here's my options form. And if I look at the designer for that one, there it is. And if I bring up my Solution Explorer, and if I look at my properties, so here's my properties. So I'm choosing this form, right? So here's my properties. And if I click on accept, I can see that the text is accept, right? The use mnemonic is true. What else is there that I have? I have tags. I can put that in, but is there anything else? Some kind of carrying value that I have? I have image, image line, image key, locked, cursor, dock, enabled, back color. Is there some way I can carry a value of accept or cancel in the form itself? Is there one here? Yeah, right? So my dialog result here, if you notice, I can choose one of these custom dialog results. Okay, cancel, whatever I want. If I don't specify, the default is cancel. This is a beautiful thing, guys and girls, right? So if I want to say okay or cancel or whatever, that's fine. So we're going to say okay is the result, because that's the closest one to accept. Do you see that there's an accept here? No. Let's choose okay. And just to make sure that this is correct, my dialog result is cancel by default. Look. I actually went to cancel, right? By default. So okay, cancel. So this is okay, even though it says accept, and this is cancel. Let's test that result out. This is good news, right? Because otherwise we'd have to program it by hand, and we don't want to do anything. We want to do it at design time as much as possible, right? Why? It's all pre-programmed for us. Rapid application development. If I have to do it in code, I got to spend time coding it, and it's got to interpret it and calculate it all. It's much better this way. So tools, options. And again, if I click accept, I should get an okay now. That's good. These are positive results. Okay, so we know we can get an okay cancel result from these two things, right? Accept and cancel. But now I want to pass information back. That's a totally different thing, right? Okay, so I want to think about another box. Before I explain how to do this, let's think about, and Tiffany asked me about this. She says, how about if I wanted to do some kind of font dialog? A dialog box that's actually built in, right? So I want to change the font of my form, right? Not this form. I want to change the font of my application, right? How do I do that? Well, I could do that, right? I could create another box, one of these boxes, right? And I could create a button here for font if I really want to, right? I could do that. And actually, maybe I just undo. Here we go. Let's make another button. Let's call it the font button. So I'm going to take the accept button, copy it, paste it, right? Put it over here. And then we'll say font. We'll call this the font. It's pretty big and ugly. It probably should be in somewhere else, but let's just put font in there. And we'll call this the font button, right? There we go, font button. The dialog result is okay, but we don't care about that right now because there is no dialog result for this one. We're going to click none for this one. Okay. All right, so when the font button is clicked, I want to instantiate from this dialog another dialog. Right? Remember, it's a cascade of forms that have to close in order for me to get back to my my application. So double click on the font, right? There it is. Here's my font button. So I got accept button, cancel button, font button. Okay, how do I create a default dialog box for the font, right? And do I have one? Do I have to drag and drop anything from my?
I think in the is it? No, the options form.
Okay. So here's my options form. Is there something I can drag from here?
Yeah.
So if I go font, here we go. Font dialog is right here, right? And what I want to do is, it doesn't matter where I drag it, somewhere off the form. Remember we talked about non-visual components? This is another non-visual component. I'm adding it in, right? So here's my font dialog. Again, for my Solution Explorer, I'm going to change my properties, which is really what I want to change, right? And I want to change my name to the, maybe my calculator fonts. Dialog, calculator, just where it really is. Font dialog. To be more realistic or more contextual. It tells me the default color, right? This default color. Allow script changes, true. Bunch of other stuff here. My font must exist is false, right? Notice that the font itself, it gives me my, whatever the font is, by default is Microsoft Sans Serif. We know that the default font is Microsoft Sans Serif 12 point or 20 point. So we can go there and change it to that. All the defaults is what we want to kind of put in here to set it up. Yep.
So if I drag the font dialog box, just go to the font somewhere, how do I get to it?
We're going to do right now. So private modifiers, show color, false, and so on. We can do that as well. That would spawn the show color dialog and so on. Okay, so how do we do this? Going back to my font here, now that I have a calculator font dialog, It's the same process, right? So I'm going to spawn the same way. So the step 1, right, which is instantiate or create a font dialog object, right? A dialog object. That's the first step, right? And which means calculator font dialog, which we're going to call calculator font dialog, is equal to new calculator font dialog. That's step 1. Oops. All right, so we've kind of created that one. Here's something, right? It's giving me an error. Why? Do I have to do this? Right? That's step 1, right? Well, no, because I dragged and dropped. So that object that I've put there, I can just show. So this part normally that we do for any kind of custom dialogues, like a dialog box or whatever, I don't have to do because I've dragged and dropped my calculator font dialog that's inside. And if you hover over it, tells you that. It says, the type of namespace calculator font dialog could not be found. Are you missing a using directive? Unless I spelled it wrong. Calculator font dialog. Right? Looks pretty good to me. And if I look at the options form, right? Here's my options form. Oops, my options form dialog, my design, right? Did I spell right? Calculator font dialog. Looks pretty good to me. It's there, right? How come I can't do it that way, right? Calculator font it even came up, right? Let me show you. If I start typing away, right? So if I just get rid of all this. Say that again. It's private, right? Yeah.
And then there's a, in the last there's the option calculator form dialog.
Yeah.
And open the properties of that.
Hold on a second. So we're going to go to options forms and over here, right? And we're going to go to our property, the calculator form or this one here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then what's the last option?
Modifiers should be same thing.
Well, here's the thing. If we make this public, right? Private means it belongs to this form, and I'm in the form. So how come I can't access it? I'm in the form. I can't access it. Private means inside the class itself, right? I can't access this thing, right? Well, I didn't initialize it, but here as an example, if I double click on the font, I can't access it from in here. I can't. Well, I can see it. Look, I can see this thing. It's right there, font dialog. But I can't instantiate a new object. And the reason why is because it already exists. So we have to go to step 2. So if I go to step 2, which is normally what we normally do is show the dialog, show dialog, right? So here we just have to go dot show dialog, right? Which should instantiate this calculator font dialog because it already exists. We already made it. We made it inside of our designer. So we don't remember I told you we don't have to do it this way. Let's see if it works. So if I press play, 1, 2, 3, gives me this thing. And then from here, we're going to go to options. We're going to have the font button, which is going to bring up the other thing, right? Now, it's the same stuff we have. Remember we talked about changing stuff? I want to change the font from 20 to 22 or whatever. That's different. Notice I have an OK cancel, right? OK cancel are dialog results. That's what they are, dialog results, right? So when I press here, if I press OK, it's going to come back to this form with an OK result, right? If whatever my OK result is, whatever I have selected in my fonts is what it's going to change in the entire application. But now that's a difficult story, and we're going to talk about this. First of all, do I have access right now to affect my calculator application? No. Number one. Second, just like we don't have access to do layouts and stuff like that right now, right? We have to kind of enable those things. And the way we would do that, of course, is to create an alternate layout that we can go to, which we don't have. That's number one. We can't do that so easily. I will make it happen. I'll make it so you can see it, right? It's going to break our layout. Potentially, it could break our layout. If I go to something from a 20 to like a, something smaller, might be okay. But if I'm going to go from a 20 to a 40, that might be a negative thing. And you can specify that here inside your, if I go cancel and I cancel out of this, and if you go down to the design part again, if I go to my options forms designer, and if I click on my calculator font dialog, notice there's a maximum size and a minimum size. I can change that so I can clamp my results. So for example, maybe I don't want to go lower than 10, right? And maybe I don't want to go higher than, and again, depends on my calculator itself. Let me see what it can probably sustain. If you want to be really careful, it's pretty big. It's pretty big. So maybe I want to go as low as 10, maybe as high as 24. And to test that, I'd recommend you test it out, right? So go in here and change this to, I don't know, 24, maybe 26. Let's see, 26. It's too big, right? So maybe you can go down here and go to 24. Maybe 24, right? See what I'm saying? So that might be the maximum size. And the minimum size, if I went down to something small, like let's go to 10 and see how that looks, right? Maybe 10, but that's really small. And it won't affect the size of my boxes, just the font, right? So from a font size perspective, let's undo, right? There we go, it's back to normal. So now we know what our options could be, maybe. And again, we can say a minimum size of 10 and a maximum point size of 24. We can put those things in there too, yes? The other way around, thank you very much. It did it automatically for me. I didn't even do anything. It says, wait, Tom, you're wrong. Right? Make sense? Okay. So now that we have that knowledge, let's see if it stops me. So if I run this thing, this is like I haven't programmed a single piece of functionality so far for this thing. I run it, right? I go tools, options, I click on the font button, and now I go 20, and if I try and pick something lower than 10, doesn't exist. If I go higher than 24, doesn't exist. And if I try typing something in manually, like, I don't know, 30, it won't allow it, right? Which is kind of cool. So some breakdowns, right? I also did not include the color, but you could include a font color in here if you really want to, and it would appear down here. I don't want that. Okay, cool. So depending on what I chose, if it's Microsoft Sans, I could choose a different type. That also can break my layout, right? That's another thing that can break me. So this, bold, all these other things, that would change my layout a little bit, but I've centered everything. So I would allow a change. How do I set it up so that the application itself has some kind of font style or whatever? I mean, it comes down to what's stored in my calculator, right? Now, here's the propagation. I got to propagate my default font style through my options. So my options itself has to affect the calculator font somehow. So whatever happens, if I press accept, right, or whatever, or if I click font, when I change my font and click accept my changes, I guess the way I'd want it to work, if I was going to be really serious about it, is it would affect this on accept and cancel on cancel, right? That's what it would have to do. Okay. That means I have to have a couple things that I want to store. I need to store font information from my application in my options form. Like, for example, font style. And the way to know that is, again, let's see what it's going to look like. I want to make my own font. That's one thing. The other thing I want to also do is the other things, square root, exponent, standard, and scientific. Layout, I want to store a layout, some kind of string for the layout. I want to be able to pass back, right? So layout has to be stored somewhere, whatever that is. Do I really have to store everything somewhere, or is some of it already done for me? Some of it's already done for me, right? Because I have kind of these controls that can store some of this information. I'm going to warn you against doing that. Please don't do that, because that means you're form dependent, right? Better that you hook into the form with some other kind of getters and setters that allow you to do that. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. So in my options form, I need to program some of these variables out, and they got to be getters and setters, right? At the class level, right? So again, up here, so here's my form class, which is my options form class. Notice that I don't have any getters and setters, right? And I could do things by hand, but this is going to give rise to me to give you an opportunity to talk about the class diagram, all right? Remember, we're in rapid application development. We want to be as lazy as possible and have the system do a lot of stuff for us, right? Do the heavy lifting, as opposed to me doing it by hand. I can do it by hand, but if there's tools that can help us, especially if you're a beginner, it's good, right? So let's talk about that. So I'm going to go back to Solution Explorer here, all right? Do this with me. I want to add a new item to help me out, right? Because I'm getting complicated now. And I want to add, if I go to the top here, when it says add new item, I want to put in diagram. I want to put in the word diagram. Here's my class diagram. And what I probably want to do is name this thing calculator class diagram, right? Which is what it is, calculator class diagram. You don't have to, but I like to put, something, some context to it. Yay, here's my calculator class diagram. It's an empty slate, right? Well, here's the beautiful thing. I can drag and drop or create new classes right into this empty slate, right? So here's my calculator form. Here's my, options form down here. I want to drag and drop this one onto this thing and let it go. Yay, beautiful. Now I got a visual representation of my class. On the top, you're going to see some options. Here's some options. Display name and type, right? I want to do that. And I also want to do this, display full signature. Good. And now over here, I want to adjust shapes width. Good. So now I've got all this here, right? So I've got my form. That's what this option form does. Right? And if I open it up, right? And if I open this up, you can see that these are all the things that I can see. This is all part of my form. That's my options form right now, right? Look at the available fields I have. The accept button, the calculated dialog, font dialog, components, all kinds of other stuff. I want to create a new field, but I want to make it a getter and setter by default. And how do I do that? This is my options form. I'm going to right click on here. And notice what I can do is I can do a bunch of things. I can add a new method, a new property, a new field, a new event, a new constructor, a new whatever I want. And it'll write the code for me. This is a beautiful thing, right? Property is what I want. And notice it comes under fields. Fields, remember, they're like instance variables, right? Properties, that's a totally different thing. And I can double click there and I can make my property. Here's my property. I can go in there and modify my property. And what would it be? Instead of it being called property, right? I don't have to make it called property. I can call it whatever I want, right? I want it to be called fonts, right? My font style or whatever I want, right? I could also call the other ones layout. I think maybe that's a good one to start with. So layout, there we go. It's going to be string, right? And maybe what I want to call it is some kind of application layout or whatever. Notice if I hover over this thing, it says string options form dot layout. Options from the layout hides inherited member control layout, and that's why it gives me that little underscore. It means that I'm actually overriding another thing that's called layout, right? So I probably want to make this something else like calculator layout, right? Which makes more sense. And does it have an underline? No, it doesn't. So options form calculator layout, and here's the getter and here's the setter, right? So what the getter is what does it return? So what's my calculator layout return, right? It's going to, if I get the information that I store on my calculator layout, the get accessor method is going to be triggered. And then the set accessor method is going to be triggered when I want to set my a private member variable with my calculator layout. Now I know what it's probably going to be called. It's probably going to be called, if you're following the nomenclature, some kind of private variable with an underscore that's going to say calculator layout, right? But if I know that all I'm going to do is read and write to it, it's a lot of overkill for me to write in, return this dot underscore calculator layout, right? And set is equal to this dot calculator layout is equal to value, which is the keyword. So this is how you would normally write it. I'd have to make some kind of instance variable out here, like before the public. So let's say here's my instance variables. Oops. I'll call this instance variables. These will be all private, and I would probably make a private, and this is the way I could do. I could make a private instance variable that's called underscore calculator layout, right? Which is of type string, right? That's my instance variable. I don't have to initialize that here. And I can also make another one, a private, what else did I choose? Square root, it'll be a Boolean, right? It's either turned off or on, right? A Boolean variable, right? Bool, which is square root, or has. We'll call it has square root. Right? Could do this, and a private Boolean, which is has exponent. Notice that I'm putting an action word in front of square root. Does it have it? Yes or no? Or I could put is square root active. That's another way I could call it, but it's got to be something that has it's a true or false value. When you answer that question, it asks you a question, And whatever the it is, like for example, if you like is square root active better, it would be written like this: is square root active. So it's either active or inactive. Maybe I like that more, right? Or is square root visible, depending on what you want to say. Is exponent active. We'll call it like that. Okay, good. And by default, these are false, right? That's default values of all these things. This is default value is empty string, right? My calculator layout. And then down here in my property, I could do something like this because I made it. I could say something like, for the getter, I'm going to return this dot underscore calculator layout, right? And for the setter, I'm going to set this dot calculator layout, this one right here, equal to value. And value is a keyword that is whatever we assign on the other side of the operator. For example, if I said calculator layout is equal to scientific, whatever's on the other side of the equal sign is the value, and that's why it's a keyword. Okay. But this is all extra work, right? And we don't have to do any of this stuff, right? This is nice. And if you really wanted to, if there was a reason for this, for example, if this is a little method, right? So you could test these methods, this getter and setter, and you can have other things like debug information that you send to the keyboard. Anytime someone sets or gets information from the calculator layout object, you can record that that's happened, right? Which is really good. It's really funky, and you can actually kick off other methods and whatever. If you have that kind of reason for this, fantastic. If not, then the much better way of doing it is get rid of all this, right? Seriously. You're going to see this is a much better, cleaner method to do it. So you don't have any of that. What you have instead is something that has getters and setters with get set. And I'll point this out to you to see what it looks like. And one line, it would look like this. That does the exact same thing. When you compile the code, get set, this thing does exactly what this does. Sets senses a private member variable and then sets it and gets it and returns everything, right, on the back end. So much better to do it this way if you have nothing to share. It's still a property, but it doesn't have anything. It's public properties, and if you wanted to relate it to a custom, instance variable, that's a different thing. It's a different scenario. That would go back to the other way. But if it's just doing this, we're just sharing a property with a getter and a setter, a default getter and a setter, then do it this way. Now, how does this look with the calculator class diagram? Well, it actually puts it in, get set, and it returns a string, right? Let's add another property. We're going to add the, like we said before, the is square root active property, which is going to be a Boolean. And we're also going to add in some other things. I'm going to actually put up some other information down here as well. So let's do this. There's two ways. You can do it here in the actual diagram. By the way, you can move the diagram around and make relations to other diagrams. Really, really cool. Or if you go down here where it says class details, it actually pulls up this other little window, which is really cool. That's why Visual Studio is packed with information, right? Things like, actual functions that no one even knows exist that are really awesome, pretty awesome. Okay, here, take a look at this. I can do it this way too. Notice this property. I've got my calculator layout. I can name the property, the new property that I want. So I can say is square root active. Now notice it's going to be a public, right? So it's going to be capitals. And the type that I'm going to put in is bool, right? And it's public. And I can do the next one. Is exponent active in one blow, bool, and then it's done. Notice that it writes all those things nicely for me, right? Now, you got to be careful to see what this does, right? Always check what code is generated, always, always. And again, the way to do that quickly is double-click on the property. It'll take you back to your code. And is this what I want, right? No, it generates code stubs, right? So I still need to clean it up to look like this. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to take this example that I did and then just clean all this up by pressing paste and paste, right? So that's how it should look. And you probably want to put some kind of comments in your code when you hand it in that says something like public properties, right? With some kind of annotation. Okay. Down in here, these are private methods, right? There's some stuff we're going to talk about here from a style perspective for this one. Private methods, right? If it's private, what did I ask you to do? Make it with an underscore. So what does that mean? Right click, rename, right, the method. This is what it should be. So if I go to rename up here, and what I want to do is I want to add at the beginning, right, an underscore with, and change the first character to small. Why? Because it kind of shows everybody that this cancel button click method is private, and that's how it should look. All of yours should look like that. I haven't really been stressing it out because I'm going, but in your code, when you submit your assignment number 2, I wasn't really a stickler for this, to be honest with you, in assignment number 1, but for assignment number 2, anything that's private, from a style perspective for our coding house, this is our coding house here. You guys all work for me. I'm the I don't know, the executive. Okay, I like to put myself as an executive. Fantasies. Anyways, and then I've come down to it and I said, you know, guys, as a standard, what we're going to do, right, is we're going to make it so that everything. So I don't want to do that. We're going to make it. I see it's just bad form to even do that. Is just make it everyone so it's a you know, you want to make it so that lowercase is the first part, and you want to do this, right? And same thing goes over here, right, where we rename everything back to what it should be looking like. Oops. And if you make a mistake, you can always correct, right? That's a great thing about Microsoft. If I was going to say something that's really awesome about the Visual Studio, it's all this power and flexibility that it has. And if I was going to tell you that there's something really sucky about Visual Studio, it's massive and it's slow and it's clunky and it's fat, and I don't like it, right? But we need it for Windows Forms, and we need it for anything that has to do with the ASP.NET framework, and it's great. It does a lot of really awesome things. If I was going to use it for the web, probably not. If I was going to do something like a Node.js website or something, I probably wouldn't use it. But it doesn't mean that it's not awesome and it can't do a lot of things. Okay, cool. So we've done all this. What does our class diagram look like? Well, it kind of adjusted, yeah? So everything that was there, it kind of adjusted, right? You can do other things. If you right-click here, you can think like show base class. Here's my base class. Right, now be careful. It's a massive, massive class, right? It's the form superclass, and it's going to take a whole. It's going to make this thing look like really big, right? There it is. So notice that there is a connection between one or the other. This is the form itself. This is the real form class, the original form class. And if I make it grow so you can fit everything, like it literally will take up most of my screen. And this is how big the class is. It's massive, right? So if you want to look at all form methods and properties and getters and setters that are built in, these are them, right? Do I need to see this half the time? Nope. So you leave it off your map. So you don't have to show this whole form class, right? So I don't want to show it. I can get rid of it just by pressing, you know, right-click and delete or remove, right? Cut, gone. If I want to show other ones and how they relate to this one, like what instantiates or if there's any connections to this thing, you can do that. Notice that over here, if you actually look at the class itself, there's fields you can show or hide, properties, methods, whatever you want in here. That's why I wanted to show you this. And we're going to come back to this when we do more special effects. For example, when I create, one of the things we're going to start doing is creating some kind of sheet that does random number generation, right? We're going to talk about random numbers. This is really great for visualizing. Okay. So great, we've done everything we need to do. We can close this form off and we can save it. It's not going to be deleted. You can always use it as some kind of, I like to think about it as a whiteboard where you can kind of draw new classes as well. You can create new classes with this form, this class diagram, like brand new classes, brand new enumerations, everything out there, and it'll write, Microsoft will actually write the code stub for you to get you going, right? Which is actually quite good. And it'll give you the right format and everything else. So if you forget how to do it or you're not sure, class diagram. All right, so we've kind of formatted our application, but we still need some comments and comment style, especially from my main class. If I do a // it gives me a little summary. What this is, kind of description of the form. Something like, options form. Controls all the options, for the calculator form. Not really, but let's suppose it did. You know, we can put that in there as a comment. You can do the same thing for splitting off your constructors, which I recommend. Something like constructors, right? If you have more than one, you can have more than one constructor in a class, right? And here's public properties. This is all you need really for public properties, unless you want these. The public properties should kind of describe themselves. And same thing with any private instance members, they should describe themselves as well. But the methods, you may want to put some kind of comments, and you can use / for that. So if you go to the top, as long as you're above the method signature, right, it actually puts in the sender, the variables, as well as a little description. So something like cancel button click event handler, right? I mean, something that's easy to understand. It's kind of descriptive, but the great thing when you put this kind of summary in, if I ever access it from anywhere else, I'll get this code hinting right here. Anything that's in the summary, I'll get, right? So I keep on doing that. So I'll say something like / kind of thing, and this is the accept button click event handler. It doesn't take long to do this, right? And then you get your marks for all your comments, right? And this is the font button click event handler. This is for you to practice to understand what these things are. That's why I'm getting you to do it. In real life, I probably wouldn't put so much comments. This is a very verbose style, right? Only because we know what these are. These are event handlers. What I might do instead is, guys, dude, last warning, okay, for today. Please, you're making my life difficult. Instead of my private methods, I might break it off, and I might do something like private methods, and yet this part here might be something like a, the event handlers. There's a section with that are private methods, and I might use some kind of other thing in here, like maybe equal signs for this one, kind of thing to make this private methods. And you don't want to do too much of these decorations because you have to maintain them, yeah? Which is not something that's cool and not recommended, actually. Here's my event handlers, right? And then if I had other kind of, public methods, I would put them down in here too, right? Usually what I try and do is this. I try and do private and then public, right? I always do private first and then public. And actually that's going down to the old style that we used to do it. If you go back to C++ or C, it's the same way. We always did private first and then public. Private instance variables, public properties, right? Private methods, public methods, right? You notice I'm not using a lot of protected. I try not to use. If I have to use protected, that means I'm trying to fix a problem. A problem in my code, as I'm talking about, right? Okay, so I've done all this work, but I haven't really had a chance to save everything back. That's part of the next part that I want to do. So if you notice, like I've set up the way to hold my information. So calculator layout, is square root active, is exponent active, those kind of things. My font, I haven't touched my font yet. I'm going to go back to that and add my font in there. But for now, let's get these working, right? Because those are the easy ones. Font is a little bit more challenging to do. So here's my accept button click, right? Where I close my button. And notice that I've kind of set off, whenever I start off this options form, right? I want to store, depending if I click accept or not, I'm going to store information from my form itself into these variables, right? That's the first thing I want to do. So down in here into my accept button, right? When the accept button's clicked before I close the event, right? And I want to think about this, how I'm going to do it, by the way, because if I click close, that information is gone, right? So I got to think about that. How am I going to do this? So I want to kind of put in that, well, this, and I want to talk about what this is, right? Let's talk about the form layout first, the calculator layout. So here's my calculator layout itself. And my calculator layout is one thing, but I want to access something that's on the button itself, which is calculator layout, the actual radio button. I want to see what the radio button is. So how do I get to that? Because in my options form, I have my calculator, my radio button. Here it is, right? And here's my layout. One is standard and one is scientific, right? So it's not called calculator layout, right? It's called standard if you look at the properties, right? Standard radio button and scientific radio button, right? So depending on what I do, if I accept the details, right? I'm actually, when I click accept, I'm not really aligning or assigning anything. I want to do the assignment with the buttons, right? So here's the thing I can do. If I double click on one of these things, right? It creates this standard radio button check changed event, right? That's the standard or default event for any kind of radio button being checked or changed. In fact, the same thing for the check buttons, right? Check boxes. So if this standard radio button is checked, then what I want is my layout, this dot underscore layout, which is the calculator layout. There it is, right? To equal whatever this is, which is, if I really want it to go there, standard, right? That means every time it's there, I want to do that, right? Accept, cancel. Got to think about that for a second, what that does, right? And how does it return that information back, right? All right, here's next. The other thing that I want to do is if I, and the other thing is I want to make sure that the other one is definitely not checked, right? But it handles it for me, yeah? So if I go back to the form, I go there with logic here. Again, it's back to logic, how this all works. So this is scientific. So we'll do the same line here. Now I'm using two different events. I'm using two different events to kind of denote whether it's scientific or standard, right? Is there a way I can use one event? Yes. I like it. I like it through the sender, right? So I can check the sender object depending on what's checked. Then if it's a sender that's checked, then I can change the result, right? Which is what I want. So one event instead of two. That's the better way to do it. Still, it's okay to do it this way. Worst case scenario. All right. I'm putting out, if you were to give me this, I'm not going to cry again, right? You know, on the assignment. And the reason why is because this will take care of the result that I want. Now the thing is, we're passing it back through multiple layers here. That's what's happening, right? I'm passing this information back, which is a very challenging thing, right? There's actually an easier way. We'll talk about that in a second, right? All right. So calculator layout is the form, is the value, right? First, let's fix one thing or another, right? And we'll do one, see if we can get the other one done today. So options forms, right? And notice that I've got two. If I click on this one, which is the events, right? And let's just hide this one. So here's standard radio button, and this is scientific radio button. I want to make both point to the same thing. So I'm just going to make this point to the standard one, right? Let's go back to the standard one. Here it is. I don't need this one anymore, yeah? Because I make both point to the same one. So let's get rid of this. Hopefully it won't break my layout, right? Then let's rename this thing. Instead of standard radio button check changed, it's going to be the calculator radio button check changed, right? That's what it is. So rename. We'll say, again, it's a private method, right? So calculator, I'll change in a second. Layout. Hard to see this, but underscore's got to be in there, and enter. Apply. One day when this thing will play, so there it is. This is what the name should be. Now, what I can't do is I can't say the calculator layout is standard, because that'll be every time, whatever you press, the calculator layout is standard. Maybe in our case, it doesn't really matter, right? But for now, what I want to say is, depending on what the sender is, I want to cast this sender as a radio button, right? Check change, whatever the radio button is, the name of the sender or the text of the sender is it's gonna have this thing. So what I need to do is something like this. So radio button, remember we did this before, right? Which we're gonna call calculator radio button. Calculator radio button, right? Calculator radio button, right? Lowercase like this is equal to the sender object downcast as, right, what it is, a radio button, right? And what have I done that? I do this because I want to get hinting on my calculator radio button that gives me the name of the radio button, or the text of the radio button, which is what I'm going to assign to the calculator layout. So it's going to be something like this. Calculator, I'm doing it in 2 lines. You can do this in 1 line. You can do it with the sender object. I'm just being lazy and, kind of splitting it off and trying to make it more apparent what's happening here. So that's in 1. I don't have to do if statements, right? 2 lines, and I save a bunch of other lines of code, and I make 1 event handler to do it all. Okay, so we assume now that this is going to be stored. Let's make a debug dot write line. Talked about this today, and I want to print out the value of this dot calculator layout. It should be a string, so shouldn't give me any problems there. But I got a problem. I don't have debug because it's only form specific. Control dot allows me to add the using system diagnostics option, which allows me to output this every time I select it. Let's try it out. All right, so then, oh man, what the hell? What happened? We got a problem, right? We got a couple of issues. One of them is here, right? I started writing calc, and I stopped, right? And that's because I was trying to tell you that you could do it here, but you don't want to do it there. You want to do something else here, right? We'll talk about what to do here. There's something we need to do here in the accept button click, right? All right. And it's a trick, and it's ugly, but it works. I'm going to put it out there, right? All right, and let's try this out again. So, 1, 2, 3. Let me go to the next page, next place here. And again, tools options, and I want to choose scientific. And there it is. Standard, it says in scientific. What happened? It said both, right? Well, both changed, right? So this changed. Standard, and then scientific, and then went to standard. And then scientific, standard, scientific. Yes. Everything is being changed. So no matter what happens here, whether I click on one or the other, it doesn't matter, right? That's a different effect that I wanted. At the end, I'll get the right results, by the way, right? Because the other one changes, right? But I wanted to point this out to you because you might think that only one will change, but actually both change because of this event. This event checks to see if this is check changed, the check changed event, right? If I wanted to, I could switch this. I could change it as a button, but it's not really because I'm actually changing the button. Leave it as is. Trust me, leave it as is. Yes. That's different because it won't actually change the button. It won't actually make it from a dot to the other dot. That's the problem. It may not do that because you're not changing anything, right? Or you could do it. It would actually physically show it, but it wouldn't actually. You won't care if it's changed or not. And that might be bad too. If you click one or the other, the click would be the other way to do it. Let's leave it as is for now. There's reasons for this later on. We're gonna fix this problem. All right. So now that I've done this and I've assigned my calculator layout a value, right? My calculator has a value. This is local to this form. I want to pass it back to my other form. Do I have access to my other form, my previous form? No, I don't. So I got to create that access, which means I need to make some kind of reference, again, back to the originating form that came from this thing, and create some values on the previous form that I'm going to store. And depending on if it's, I'm going to check 2 ways. One, if I press the accept button, and the other one, if it's the accept button, the receiving and the sending, to make sure that there's good validation. So here somewhere, and I can make it a public property too. I can make it so that it's a public property, what it is. I didn't do it last time, but I could do a public property like this, public, right, where my return type, or my type is form. I can call this previous form. It can even be a class, right, with a getter and a setter. But do I really need a setter? Not really. Right? Because class is a reference type, I never need a setter because I'm never going to reset the class to something else. This form, the previous form object, I'm never going to set this to something else. So I could leave it as just the getter. Remember, just the getter in a getter and setter scenario means this is read only, right? You can't write to it because it won't have the set. And that's why we use getter setters as opposed to just using public member variables, or, it doesn't make any sense. I can control whether you can write to something, where I can also control whether you can read from something. For example, you can write something, but you can't read from it. That's more rare. Usually we don't do it that way, okay? All right, so we have a previous form, but we don't have a reference to this previous form, but it is public, which means when we create this options form inside the calculator itself, so if I go to the calculator, here it is. Here's our options form. I could set the value of it as we create it, like right here. So maybe we'll say, maybe make this step 2 and this step 3, right? We'll say something like set of reference to the previous form property of the options form to this form. That's what we're doing, right? So we're going to say options form dot previous form. What's happening here? How come I'm not getting previous form, right? Here it is equal to this, right? I can do this still because even though I'm setting a value, right? And I'm getting an error. And why am I getting this error? It says property or indexer options form previous form cannot be assigned to it is read only, right? No setter, right? This is where I actually am setting a reference, right? I'm setting a new reference. I'm changing what it was pointing to before, which is nothing, to this, right? So if I go back to the options form, if I put the setter back in, right, and set, and if I go back to the calculator form, now it should take away my error, right? There it is. And this sets the value of this previous form. Okay, good. I've got the value of previous form. And now, because I have the value of previous forms, I can write back to it, right, before I close anything off. And I'm going to do that with my accept button. Right, when I accept button, I'm going to write values back to the previous form, which would be my layout. All right. So that means I could have a public property in my calculator form, which matches the public property in my options form. So for example, I have my private instance variables, my constructors, and maybe I want to have a public property. So here are my public properties in here. This is in my calculator form. So we'll say public properties. And then we'll call this, again, it'll be public. What will it return? A string. And we'll say that it is the calculator form layout, right? That's what it is. So now it's public string. And we'll make it so that it is has getter and setter capability. So it is a property, not just a member variable, which actually acts very differently in C#. C# compares to a member variable. Again, we're maintaining the whole object-oriented approach to information hiding, private member variables and public properties. We're keeping that paradigm alive when we do this. And now what I want to do is when we set this thing, I don't want to put getters and setters. Here's a great use of the getters and setters. Let's make it work, right? So what I want to do is actually hit up a private instance variable. We'll do this now. So private, we'll call this the underscore, we're going to be a string with underscore calculator form layout. Notice it's the same name, right? But here we'll actually do a real getter and setter example, right? So get and then set. And inside my getter and setter methods, bear with me, right? What we'll do is we will actually return the value that we want, return this dot underscore calculator form. This one, if they want it, they probably won't. And this one will actually set it. So we'll say something like, this is important, this dot underscore calculator form layout is equal to value. But when we set the value of it, I also want to use a debug.writeLine, debug.writeLine, right? To say something like calculator form changed, calculator form changed. So this is a way of debugging and using the getter and setter methods to be more interactive and helpful from a debugging perspective. But you can use them for other things too. You can use them for calling other methods. And a good example of this is I made a game one time and I want to set a high score. So I had a scoreboard class, and I set the high score in my scoreboard class, right? And as soon as I set the high score, I said, okay, update the scoreboard. That was a method. And the update method actually updated the user interface when I set the high score. It was all done here in getters and setters. So great use of that. And there's other really cool functions, especially with testing and all that. Okay, cool. So I want to just check the form layout. That's all I'm checking right now. Okay. So I'm doing that all in options form. So if I go to options form, here's options form. Going back to this, I'm not finished yet. So I've got the ability for me to hold a layout, and I can set it because I have a reference to the previous form, right? Reference to previous form, which in this case is the calculated form. Okay. Oops. And then what I want to do is down in my accept button, it's not finished yet, right? This is where I set the value. I can say, so this dot previous form, okay, dot calculator. Again, make sure we have to kind of find out what it was called before. Calculator. What was it called again? I don't have access to that because I've made my previous form a form type. If I want a good code hinting, I need to make it a calculator form. Otherwise, I won't get code hinting. Cast it too, but I might as well just, if I'm going to do this kind of work, I might as well just do it properly. So I've got previous form dot calculator layout, right, is equal to this dot calculator form layout, which is a property. And I only do that in the accept button. So why am I doing all this convoluted work? Right? Why am I setting all these variables and whatever? Because I can still press the cancel button. It'll still close the form and go back, but not set the values. I would store the values temporarily, right? I'll store the values temporarily, but then I won't have to propagate that back. Similarly, if I ever open up this thing again, right, I want to read the default calculator form, setting, whatever that was, and I want to populate my this variable with that previous setting. So I've gone this way back. Now I can go forward the other way. And the way to do that, of course, is when my calculator form loads, right? So the load event, right? There's a couple things that can happen. One, I could set a default value for this calculator form layout, right? So the calculator form layout default value would be standard, right? I could do that. And I would either do that inside my constructor, where my calculator form is instantiated the first time, right? So at least it's set. So example, I would do something like this. This dot calculator form layout. Notice I'm using the property, not the private instance variable, right? I could set that to standard right here. So when it's set, it's standard, right? And only when it's instantiated. So it only happens once, right? And then when it goes back, it sends it as standard. So when I instantiate my options, which is way down here, right? Here's my options toolstrip menu item. When I instantiate this right here, I set the value. Not only do I do this previous form, but I also set the value of other things like, for example, options form dot calculator layout is equal to this dot calculator layout, right? I can set that up. So it goes both ways, right? Because I have public properties on both sides, right? So whether I'm going to the calculator, to the options form or coming back, I'll remember my options. Now, I don't have enough time to show you all the other ones, but you could do the same thing for, is the square root visible or not? Is the exponent visible or not? If you want to have like just a couple functions that pop up. Did I save the font information? I create my font information, a bunch of properties for my fonts, like for example, my font style, my font family, my font color, my font size, my font style, which is italics or bold. All those things, store them all things. I could do that. Or I could create a whole class, custom class that has all that information, right? There's lots of other options and pass the whole custom class back, the font object back to the previous form, and then modify the previous form from the current form and vice versa by holding that information, right? Lots of options, yes.
How can I get the font information from a font dialog? Because actually you can show the font dialog, but You can choose, but how can I get the information?
The dialog results. So whatever the dialog result is, you can access the font result, whatever it is. So if they change something, whatever the result, the value is of the font dialog, remember, you're storing that information because it's an object that's been instantiated. It's going to store that information. You may just ignore it. That's all that happens, right? Yes, yes. And you can set up whatever you want. Any other questions around that? So today I've given you most of the things you need for your assignment number 2, right? Including extra stuff that you didn't ask me for, which is probably for some of you, confusing. But sift through it. Watch that 8 to 10 minutes of the video that you're going to do for the video, so you get that piece you need. Okay. Remember that your assignment 2 is due next week on Sunday night, right? And Monday when we come in, we'll do something else. I'll probably give you another assignment, and I'll probably give you, and I'm probably going to do a review next week for the exam. Okay. Thank you so much, guys, and see you next week. I'll put this up on GitHub in a second.